Pleased to have Eileen Reavey from the National Popular Vote Compact joining us. National Popular Vote is the nonprofit organization which authored the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, the bill she'll be discussing tonight. National Popular Vote was founded in 2006 and has lobbied for this bill all across the country for the past 15 years. Eileen Reavey first got involved with the National Popular Vote by starting a grassroots group of supporters in Oregon. After successfully passing the National Popular Vote bill in Oregon, it was stalled for nearly a decade. Eileen joined the team as the National Grassroots Director. She works on building momentum and support for this issue nationwide and on training volunteers to be organizers and informed advocates for the cause. Eileen is based in Portland, Oregon. So thanks for joining us from the West Coast, Eileen. We're all looking forward to hearing you speak to us tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kelly, for that introduction. And hello, nice to meet all of you. I hope you're doing well. I know you live in a beautiful part of the country. My grandmother actually lived in Asheville for a very long time. So I hope that you're having nice weather and all just doing well. So with that, I think you all should be able to see my screen now. So I always like to start these presentations of talking about how we can get to a national popular vote, how we should move towards one person, one vote in our presidential elections by talking about how we currently elect the president. And I know you're all league members, you know how this works, but I'm just going to very quickly spend a minute or two on how the Electoral College works first. So how do we elect our president? We as the Electoral College. So on election day, you and I cast our ballots for the candidates of our choice, but the real vote is when electors meet in December and cast their ballots. So there are 538 electors who are actually the individuals who get to vote and decide who the next president of the United States is. States are allocated one electoral vote for every representative that they have in Congress. So every state starts with at least 3. So 2 for their 2 US senators, 1 for their minimum 1 US House member, and then every state has an additional elector for every additional member of the House. So to win the presidency, to win the Electoral College, the candidate needs to receive a majority of electoral votes. Right now, that number is at 270. That's the magic number that we watch on election night that candidates build to, that they're working towards. So who are these people? They decide who the next president of the United States is, but we often have no idea who they are. So the US Constitution gives explicit power to the states to decide how their electors are chosen. Specifically, Article 2, Section 1 states, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So the state legislature gets to choose the manner in which the electors are chosen. It's completely up to the state legislatures to decide. And this is a power that the Supreme Court has termed a plenary power or an absolute power of the states. So currently, 48 states choose their electors based on whoever received the most votes in their state on election day. We refer to this as a winner-take-all law or statewide winner-take-all law. So in California, if the Democratic candidate receives the most votes, they get all 55 of California's electoral votes. Same thing in Texas. If the Republican candidate receives the most votes in the state of Texas, they get all 38 of Texas's electoral votes. So in 2016, if you are one of the 4.5 million Californians who cast your ballot for Donald Trump, or one of the 3.8 million Texans who cast your ballot for Hillary Clinton, your vote was effectively thrown out at the state line. What the state law said, nope, the other party got more votes, and so they're going to be 100% of the representation when our electors meet to vote on behalf of the state of Texas or California. So state law is how we end up with these divergent elections where the popular vote winner is the Electoral College loser. The way that states vote in the Electoral College is an important part of how we get to that outcome. And this has happened 5 times in our nation's history, that 5 of our 46 presidents have been elected despite getting less votes overall. Most recently, it has denied 2 Democrats the presidency. And so sometimes when we talk about reform, people think that changing the system is just a Democratic ploy to try and make sure that we only have Democratic candidates winning the presidential election from here on out. But that's not what this is about. This is a nonpartisan movement, and it's grounded in the fact that we want to make every vote equal. And when people bring up this objection, what I like to point to is that we actually almost had another divergent election in 2004 that would have denied George Bush the presidency in his second term. So if in 2004, 60,000 more voters had voted for John Kerry instead of George Bush, John Kerry would have won the state of Ohio, and then he would have won the Electoral College, despite a popular vote loss almost as large as Donald Trump's margin in 2016. So we almost had it go the other way within a matter of 4 years after the 2000 election. And if 60,000 votes sounds like a lot, it's good to remember that 115 million ballots were cast in that election. So 60,000 voters in one state going the other way is something that's very plausible to have happen. And honestly, right now, we're in an era of close elections. If we refer to 2004 as a near miss election, where we almost elected the person who got less votes, 2020 was even closer. So if 22,000 voters, less than 22,000 actually, had changed their minds and voted for Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden, we would have had another Donald Trump presidency. So despite Joe Biden's 7 million lead in the popular vote, if just 5,300 voters in Arizona, 5,900 voters in Georgia, and 10,300 voters in Arizona had flipped and voted the other way, then Donald Trump would have won the 37 electoral votes from those states, because it was very close in all of those states. And that would have resulted in a tie in the Electoral College, where what happens when we have a tie, I personally find just as scary as the possibility of electing the candidate who gets less votes. When we have a contingent election, the decision goes to the US House of Representatives. And you might be thinking, okay, well, the House is currently controlled by a Democratic majority, so they would have voted for the Democratic candidate and Joe Biden would have still been the president. Except not every member of Congress, every member of the House has one vote. Every state has one vote. So when we know that Republicans control a majority of state delegations within the House, even though as individuals they're in the minority. And so we know that we would have been looking at another Donald Trump presidency if just under 22,000 voters had gone the other way. So we're in this time period where in the last 20 years, we had 2 elections where the person who got less votes won, and we almost had 2 more. So this is something that's a really big problem, especially right now in our modern times. And the implications of our current system go beyond just having the person who got less votes potentially ending up in the White House. We have what we call the battleground state problem, where the entire campaign is really concentrated in just a handful of states. And this is because of those winner take all laws. Because before the general election even begins, candidates on both sides already know how a majority of states are going to vote. They know that some states are decidedly Republican and that some are decidedly Democratic. And the entire campaign is just run in those states where they're closely divided in an election year. And those are the swing states or the battleground states. If we look at some recent elections, in 2012, the entire presidential campaign, the general election events happened in just 12 states. 2/3 of those events happened in just 4 states. 38 states that year were completely ignored, including, you can see the entire West Coast, almost the entire South, most of the Northeast, and most of our most small and rural states. Same thing in 2016, 94% of all campaign events were in just 12 states. And again, 2/3 were in just 6 states. In 2020, 96% of all general election campaign events are in, again, just a dozen states. Florida and Pennsylvania together received 37% of all general election campaign events this year. So these battleground states have outsized power in the presidential election system because they attract all of the attention, during the general election. But the impacts of them having this much power, they go beyond campaigning, and they touch on the way that candidates govern and the way that policy is shaped. So if we look at federal grants, for example, this book, Presidential Pork by Dr. John Hudak, he's a fellow at the Brookings Institute. And in his research, he found that overall, controlling for variables, including estate size and natural disaster relief funds, that presidential election swing states get 7.6% more federal grants than safe states, which were worth about 5.7% more grant dollars overall. And maybe those percentages don't sound like a lot, but when we're talking about the federal budget, this equates to huge amounts of money. So if we take Tennessee, which is an average size state in this country, if they had been a swing state in 2008, they would have likely have received 300 more federal grants worth an additional $60 million every year that they were a swing state leading up to the next presidential election. Similarly, we see that highly competitive swing states get twice as many disaster declarations as non-competitive states. And again, a lot of money comes with these disaster declarations, and you'd think that they based on the severity of the disaster, the existing resources in the state to respond. If maybe there was a compounding event that they already had a hurricane earlier that month and they're really strapped for resources and need federal aid. All of those things you think would be weighing in more than, can this state help my political party win the next presidential election? If yes, great. They're going to be twice as likely to get disaster declarations from the federal government. And when we talk about these dollars, it's important to note that it's not as if dollars are going to programs that don't deserve it. These are programs that I'm sure absolutely deserve to be well funded across the United States. But what's effectively happening is that our members of Congress, as well as the executive branch, our president, are able to leverage federal dollars, tax dollars paid for by you and I and people all across this country, in order to try and help their political parties stay in power for the next presidential election. And I think we can all agree that that's not the way that we think our dollars should be able to be leveraged. They should be going to where they have the most need, not where they can most help the president or his or her political party win the next election. And so what does all of this add up to? Battleground states get more campaign events, more federal grants, more disaster declarations, and they have all the power. And they also have the power, not just in terms of funding, but in terms of what policies are proposed. So we see candidates propose policies that are geared towards winning over specific types of voters in swing states. So 2 examples of this. No Child Left Behind was proposed by a Republican candidate for president and was the largest federal action taken into public education in the history of our country. Now, the federal government getting involved in something traditionally run by states is not what you expect from a Republican candidate for president. But this policy was geared towards winning over education-minded voters in the critical swing state of Ohio. And in fact, it was eventually signed into law in the Cincinnati suburbs. When the Obama administration was running for re-election in 2011, they had a federal tax credit program promoting clean energy. Ohio companies, again, still a critical battleground state at that time, got nearly 4 times the average that went to all other states. So states that happen to be closely divided during an election year benefit immensely from being a battleground state. And you might be sitting here thinking, okay, well, we're in North Carolina. This sounds like a good deal to us. This is helping, make us more relevant. Maybe we shouldn't change the system. But it's important to think about the fact that if you're a battleground state, can change from election to election. And the perks of being a battleground state, you're either all in or you're all out. There's not really a lot of in between. And you can look at states like Virginia and Colorado that they were battleground states in 2016, and they were completely ignored this election because they knew how the electoral votes were going to be cast in that state. And so when we're talking about change, yeah, you could theoretically hold on to the current system in a battleground state like in North Carolina because it might make you relevant in the next election. But wouldn't it be better to be relevant in every presidential election, to know that no matter where you live in this country, your vote will be equal and that you'll have the same amount of control, one person, one vote, over changing the outcome of the presidential election? And so that brings us to the national popular vote and how I believe we should elect the president. This is how we elect almost every other office in the country. It's time we modernize our presidential elections to make every vote being equal. Every vote being equal would mean that candidates would have to care about the entire population's interests, not just those in swing states. So we'd break the system where candidates advocate for a specific cause or a certain way because it polls well with swing voters. And instead, instead of having during the presidential and vice presidential debate, hearing about fracking in both of those instances, maybe we would have heard about the wildfires that were affecting states that 1 in 5 Americans lived in over the summer. Maybe we'd hear about climate change, or maybe we just hear about issues that affect more Americans rather than the amount of airtime that's spent on fracking because it's a special interest in a swing state. And so the answer to how we achieve this is the National Popular Vote Bill. The National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and DC. This is a bill passed by states to change how they vote in the Electoral College. So we replace states' winner-take-all laws with new state laws that say our electoral votes are going to go to the person who won the most votes across the entire country in all 50 states and DC. And this bill has a kicker. It only goes into effect when states with 270 electoral votes have been committed to the compact. So when we have enough electoral votes to control the election and guarantee a block of votes to the national popular vote winner, and that block is enough to win the election, that is when our bill goes into effect in these various states. And the reality of our current electoral system, when we look at the country, we know we're a compilation of diverse people with differing opinions who happen to live in certain states. And I know when I cast my ballot on election day, I think about what's most important to the entire country, not my specific state. And I think most people do the same. They cast their ballots as Americans, not as Oregonians or Floridians or Pennsylvanians or anything else, but as Americans. And our bill allows our electoral system to reflect this reality about our country and have the true will of the people decide who sits in the one office that represents all of us. So if this is something that you haven't heard of before and it sounds a little far-fetched, I have good news for you. This bill has already been passed by 15 states and DC with 196 electoral votes. In 2019, during that legislative session, 4 states passed our bill, which was the most number of states we've had join in 1 year so far. One of those states was Colorado. We ended up having to defend that enactment at the ballot, and we successfully passed that in November of 2020. And now that we're looking at the 2021 legislative session, we already have bills introduced in over a dozen states throughout the country, and are looking forward to seeing what forward progress we can make in some of these states, because we're already 73% of the way there towards electing the president by popular vote. We only need to get 74 more electoral votes to make this a reality, and our hope is to do that ahead of the next presidential election. And so before I switch over to Q&A, I'm going to go through just some of the objections and misconceptions that sometimes people bring up about this bill and about this reform. So number one, this is a nonpartisan bill, and it's a nonpartisan organization. It's not a reaction to the 2016 election. We were in existence a full decade before Donald Trump was elected. So it's not about what's helpful for the left or what's helpful for the right. It's about what's best for all Americans and what makes every voter equal, and that's the National Popular Vote Bill. This bill, just so you know, has been endorsed by the League of Women Voters US for about a decade now. They've had a stance in support of this. And you might be thinking, especially since this is a group of League members, oftentimes the League members are very well informed about the Constitution, and you might be saying, well, hey, isn't there something in there about interstate compacts and congressional consent? So yes. Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution does say that congressional consent is required for interstate compacts, which is what our bill is. However, the Supreme Court has ruled consistently that consent is only necessary for compacts that encroach upon federal supremacy. Now, we do not believe that our bill encroaches upon federal supremacy because awarding electors is explicitly in the Constitution as a state power. It's not an implied power of the states, it's explicitly left up to the states in Article 2, Section 1. And so that's why we don't think that congressional consent is necessary. Now, that being said, if after our bill reaches 270 electoral votes, the Supreme Court decides to overturn 100 years of precedent and say that we do need congressional consent, that's okay. We will go and then lobby Congress on this bill the same way that we've lobbied all 50 state legislatures in support of this bill. So it wouldn't be the end of the bill, it would just be one more thing that we had to do. Similarly, a lot of questions often come up about withdrawing from the compact. So it's important to note that states can withdraw from the compact, yes. However, they cannot do so between July 20th of a presidential election year and 6 months later, which is Inauguration Day of the following year. And that 6-month blackout period covers a really important period of time. It covers when the major parties will have their conventions and officially nominate their candidate. So then it effectively covers the entire general election, the day that you and I vote, the day the electors vote, the day that the ballots are counted in Congress, all the way up until Inauguration Day. A state cannot withdraw during that time. And this is enforced not by national popular vote or a particular Secretary of State or a governor. It's enforced by the Impairments Clause of the US Constitution. If any state did try and be very, very partisan, say it's October, and a big state like California said, we've got a Democratic trifecta, the Republican candidate looks like they're going to win the national popular vote, and the Democratic candidate would have won under the old system, we're going to remove ourselves from the compact. Even if they held an emergency session in October and they got the bill passed on an emergency basis, it still could not go into effect until after the next president was inaugurated, and because of the Impairments Clause of the Constitution, so it'd be enforced by the Supreme Court. And of course, oftentimes get questions about the framers when we talk about this and the founders of our country. What would they think of this? And it's important to note that when it comes to determining the way that the president was elected, this was something that was a pretty big compromise at the very end of the Constitutional Convention. It was decided in the final committee of unfinished business, because the framers had taken 30 votes over 22 separate days to determine how the president should be elected. And they went back and forth on this. They voted in favor of a national popular vote. They voted against it. They voted for electors, and then they voted against it. They voted on the congressional district system method. They voted on governors picking the electors for the states. And ultimately, they decided that the state legislatures were the closest body to the people. They could decide what was best for their citizens and to leave it up to the states. So we're using that system that the founders created and going to state legislators and saying, we think this is a better way. If you agree with us, then pass our bill. So I think that they, if we could be so bold to even guess what they would think, well, we're working within the system that they created, and we're respecting that by continuing to use the Electoral College in order to achieve a national popular vote. And then sometimes that objection from people comes up as really, well, they didn't want a national popular vote. They wouldn't like this system. It's not what they intended. And the thing to remember there is that the way that we elect the president now is nothing like it was at the founding of our country. In the first election, only 5 states even allowed a very select number of citizens, white, wealthy men of us over a certain age and stature. Only 5 states allowed citizens to vote in any form. It wasn't until the 10th election for president that a majority of states used the winner-take-all laws that we have today, meaning that most of the founders had been dead for decades by the time that our current system was in place. And the winner-take-all law, as I said just a moment ago, wasn't even thought of at the Constitutional Convention. They didn't debate on it because no one had thought of it at that time. And so the current system that we have is nothing like what they had envisioned. And so there's certainly nothing wrong with using the framework in order to move to something that works better for people in this current day and age. Another question that comes up a lot is around the small states. People thinking that the Electoral College is meant to protect the small states. And if we move to a national popular vote, we're taking something away from them. So two-part answer there. No, one, that's not the purpose of the Electoral College. The Senate exists to give equal suffrage to all the states, but that's not why we have the Electoral College. And in fact, at the Constitutional Convention, the argument over how the president should be elected wasn't between big states and small states. It was between slaveholding states and non-slaveholding states. But then if we look at the practical implications for the current system is not benefiting small states. It's a natural thing, I think, to think that it does, because you look at it and say, wow, Wyoming only has to have this number of voters to control every elector, and Florida has to have 3 times as many people turn out to vote in order to control a single elector. And that's really advantaging the small states. But in effect, because of the winner take all laws that 48 of our states have chosen to use, they're really disadvantaged because the candidates already know that whether that state is Wyoming or whether it's California, how their electoral votes are going to go. And so they're not battleground states, and therefore they don't have any power in this current system. And if we look at the 13 smallest states, which are those with 3 or 4 electoral votes, they're actually the most disadvantaged under the current system, because 6 of them are decidedly Democratic, 6 are decidedly Republican, and 1 is sometimes a swing state. So the current system is certainly not benefiting small states. And we know that state legislators agree with us on this, because legislators in Hawaii, Delaware, Vermont, DC, and Rhode Island have all looked at our bill and realized that it would be better off for their citizens to have every vote being equal, and they've signed on. And when we talk about what a campaign would look like where every voter is relevant, we know that candidates would go all over. They're going to go to all 50 states. They're not just going to go to the big states or any certain pocket of population. That's what happens now, right? That some states get completely ignored under the current system. That's not going to happen under a national popular vote. We're not going to have people ignoring Wyoming just because it's Wyoming. No, they've got 550,000 people there. That was the margin of victory of the 2000 presidential election popular vote. So we're going to see candidates going everywhere, because a voter in Durham, North Carolina is going to be just as valuable as a voter in downtown LA. And we're not going to see them just going to big cities either. I think that this misconception comes from people often thinking that cities are a lot bigger than they actually are. But if you add it up, if you take the 100 largest US cities, their entire population makes up 19% of the US population. It just so happens that rural America, as defined by the US Census, also makes up 19% of the population. And so you could no more talk to one group of voters than you could talk to the other, right? And expect to win. You can't talk to 19% of your electorate and expect to win the election. You've got to talk to both, as well as the 62% of people who live in the suburbs, where we know that those voters are evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. And so candidates are going to go all over when we have a national popular vote, because for the first time in our presidential elections, every vote's going to be equal. We're not going to have swing states. We're not going to have flyover states. We're not going to have blue states or red states. We're just going to have voters, every vote being equal. And instead of tracking to 270 on election night, we're going to be tracking which person was able to persuade millions of more voters to be supportive of them. And so with that, with our campaign, there's a couple different ways you can get involved if this is something you want to take up either individually or as a local league affiliate. Number one, please write your legislator. If you just go to nationalpopularvote.com/NC, you can put in your address and you can customize the letter that pops up there so that you can contact your legislators and let them know that you support this bill. We don't have a bill introduced in the North Carolina legislature yet, but expect we will have one in the coming month or so, and so that we'll have that on record for people to write in support of. You can also volunteer to spread the word about this, whether it's through the league or just, reaching out to your friends and family, either in North Carolina or in other states, letting them know that this is a campaign that they can get involved with. If you want to write a letter to the editor of your local paper, we have templates you can work off of, or you can draft your own, just talking about the importance of one person, one vote. And then if you are interested, we also sometimes do phone banks into other states when a bill is up in front of the legislature. So there's opportunities to get involved with this effort all year round. So I'll leave these links up here for a minute. And I'll also put them in the chat. But then otherwise I'll stop here and I'm going to look at the questions that have popped up here. Okay. What states that have Republican legislatures control have supported the national popular vote? Good question. So I'm going to go back to a map that I had up here a little bit earlier for reference, which I think is here. Yes. So of the states where we have passed this bill, admittedly that more democratically controlled states have been in favor of our bill. We have passed the Oklahoma and Arkansas houses when they were controlled by Republicans. When we passed New York at that time, it was a split chamber and the Senate was controlled by Republicans. As far as bipartisan support elsewhere, we do have in Arizona, when we passed the bill, we had 2/3 of the legislature overall in a Republican legislature in support of our bill. And in Michigan, just as recently as 2018, we had 25 Republican sponsors on our bill. So since the 2016 election, we have not gotten through any Republican legislatures, but we do continue to see some bipartisan support across the country. And then while I'm on this slide, I'll just note that these states that are in orange are the states where our bill has passed through one legislative chamber before. And if we just passed that bill in those states, that would be enough electoral votes on its own to get us to the 270 threshold, because there's 88 electoral votes there. Does ranked choice voting factor into this project? So yes, ranked choice voting is a complementary system that can go along with national popular vote. So right now, Maine was the first state in 2020 to use ranked choice voting for deciding who won their electoral votes within each congressional district. Alaska has now signed on and said they're going to do that moving forward in the 2024 election. And so there is a way for, if the national popular vote bill is in effect, for states that use ranked choice voting to all work together to pool their votes to calculate that for the national popular vote total. I say there's a proposal because it hasn't been codified anywhere yet, because the national popular vote bill is not yet in effect. But I think we'll see that this year in Maine, the bill, because they have ranked choice voting already and they're considering national popular vote. So I think we'll see that language codified in Maine for how that would work together. Jumping up to an earlier question, if states have the power to decide how to dole out electoral votes, how did so many states get to winner take all as a way of allocating their electors? Great question. If we recall that at the founding of our country, the founders thought we wouldn't have political parties, and they thought that that was going to stick throughout our presidential election and other electoral systems. And then our electoral system that they set up worked really well when it was electing the person who they already knew was going to be president, George Washington. And then political parties popped up after that. And it was actually Virginia was the first state to move towards a national popular vote and thinking about the fourth presidential election, because in that case, one of the electors that one of the candidates expected to win didn't vote for them. And they thought, oh, no, I am a Virginia man. I'm going to win the presidency. And this is unacceptable that I didn't win. So I'm going to lean on the Virginia legislature to make sure that I get every electoral vote out of Virginia next election. And that set off honestly an arms race of other states then saying, oh, well, if you're going to do that, then we're also going to award all of our electoral votes to the person who got the most votes in our state. Because at that time, when our presidential election system was very different than it is now in the early 1800s, it benefited certain partisan people that were running for office. And then that just stuck with the system that we have that now 48 of our states use over time. And the reason that, we haven't seen more momentum to shift away from it, especially this question comes up around, well, why aren't we advocating for the congressional district system method that Maine and Nebraska use, or why not proportional voting of our electoral votes? Because right now, any state, if you're a safe state, you're giving up electoral votes, you're conceding them to the other political party. If you look at this from a very partisan lens, because it's partisan people that have to pass this bill, that they wouldn't want to give up any electoral votes to the other candidate, even if it would be more fair to the people overall. And that's the beauty of our bill, is that it's not asking one state to take action on their own. It's saying, hey, let's work together to systemically fix this problem. And our bill will only go into effect in your state when it's guaranteed to change the outcome across the country for the entire population. Can I briefly explain again why small states are not disadvantaged? Yes. So I'm going to pull back up this slide. So if we look at this little cartoon graphic that we have here, what this is showing is that during the 2008, 2012, and 2016 presidential elections, the 8 smallest states, so those with just 3 electoral votes, all of those together had 24 electoral votes. If they had an advantage under the current system, you'd think that they would get more campaign visits than Wisconsin, which only has 10 electoral votes. But they don't. Between those 3 elections, they only had 1 campaign visit among those 8 states through that entire time period, because all of those states, they already knew if they were going to vote Democratic or Republican. They weren't swing states, as compared to Wisconsin, over that same amount of time, got 40 campaign events because of the fact that they were a closely divided battleground state. And so they're not advantaged under the current system at all. And they won't be disadvantaged by a national popular vote because every vote will be equal under a national popular vote. Candidates will focus on, well, hey, can we turn out voters all across the country, regardless of what state they live in? If they're going to vote for me, I want to try and get their vote. So it doesn't matter if they're in rural Maine or Vermont, or if they're in New York City, their vote is equal. And so we're going to see candidates go all over. And I think there's also an argument to be made about the fact that campaigning in a lot of those places is also less expensive. And so that's another reason why they're going to be really focusing on turning out the vote all across the country, and not just trying to campaign in any of our big population centers. The other point that I brought up was around the fact that it's often, it's an easy, not an easy, but it is a natural tendency to think that people are just going to go to like California and New York. But those 2 states together are still only 18% of our population. And there's a heck of a lot of people all throughout the rest of the country who are voting and are going to continue to vote in these elections. And so candidates are going to go all over to all 50 states when we have a national popular vote.
Are there any more questions for Eileen? I think those were really good questions, don't you, Kelly?
Mm-hmm. Gail has one more. Can we use any of your slides, Eileen?
Yeah, I can send you the slide deck afterwards that you can use, definitely. Also, if you want to give a presentation on this, I have a template that's created that's shorter, that's intended for volunteers to deliver, and it's a shorter amount of time, between 15 and 20 minutes. So I can share that as well.
That would be great.
That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Eileen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope our members and our guests really appreciate it. It does seem like they did. It was very informative. And we appreciate your sharing your slides and spending so much time with us this evening.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that everyone else on here can stay, especially the members. We're going to talk about some of our, a little bit of business before we let you go this evening. I got a lot out of it. I thought that that was great. Oh, and she's got some more information for us there. So just so you know, we did have, for all of our members here, we did have a program planning committee meeting last week. If you recall, we voted on priorities for the 2020-2021 year in May and agreed that we would revisit them after the 2020 general election, which we did last year. You'll be pleased to know that the National Popular Vote Compact is part of that. I'm going to share my screen. Looks like a couple more people just came into the waiting room. Maybe they got out and came back in. Okay, doesn't look like I have this. Give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. Okay, so we have reevaluated our program and priorities meeting. So we had a meeting last week on January 19th. There were a good number of people who attended, members and board members. We had a great discussion. I was a little concerned that maybe after the general election, people's energy would start to flag, but fortunately there's been so much concern that's happened, so much news in the last couple of weeks that people are still very engaged and interested. And we came up with what I think is a very robust program. This will carry us through the end of June. We'll meet again in May to come up with another set of programs or carry these over, but at least a new slate for the 2021-2022 year. So the external priorities are that we are going to continue with the ERA. And that work will be advocating for removal of the arbitrary deadline, passage of the ERA, continued work within North Carolina to ratify and promote women's rights in North Carolina. We're hoping, oh, I've got a little spell check error there. We're hoping that this will be, with the new Senate, that this is something that will not continue to be on our priority list, and we'll get this taken care of soon. The second one is redistricting. This is a redistricting year. The US Census was last year. The data will come to North Carolina sometime this year, to all states sometime this year, and new districts will be drawn up. So our work will be working with a consortium of groups in Western North Carolina and across North Carolina to support through advocacy and education a fair and independent process. That'll be involved in a lot of outreach, a lot of contacting the General Assembly members, a lot of educating about the process. Voter services, there's a great deal of passion around this topic during the meeting last week. I think people are rightly very concerned that, you know, we may need to look at doing some things to counter voter suppression. We've already seen an increase of legislatures across the country who were concerned about activities that went on last year, come up with more legislation to tamp down the vote. And we would not be surprised to see voter ID law, for instance, come back into play in North Carolina this year. But also civics. We're not exactly sure what this looks like. It's about getting maybe out into the schools, educating citizens. In any case, the voter services team that's being co-chaired by Sue Casey and Aiden Carson, among some other members, will get together and start mapping out a program to build a robust education program for voter services. And as you just heard, the National Popular Vote Compact was adopted as an external priority, which is supporting the abolition of the Electoral College and through education, support the National Vote Compact. I won't go into more detail than that since you just saw Eileen's excellent presentation. For intern priorities, this has not really changed. Continue to build awareness. During the election season, I thought we made good use of email, website, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, reaching out to members and interested parties. And we're starting our work with outreach circles, more to come on that, but it's about leveraging our contacts when there's an activity such as, contact your legislator, your senator, your state senator, and tell them to support the drawing of fair districts, for example. But again, more to come on that. It's just a way for us to continue all possible avenues of outreach for our program. Fundraising, always increasing diversity and engaging youth. Sort of those last two continue to go hand in hand. We will ask the members to approve this. We're not going to do it tonight. We're not taking minutes, but we will do an online election like we did in May for adoption of this year's priorities. So look for that in your inbox, all members. And we also want this to go out to all members. So proposed priorities for member approval. This has not changed. Some of these are part of our mission, promoting a civically engaged and informed community by offering educational events, accessible resources, continue to look for ways to diversify our audience, defending the integrity of our democracy. That's a big one, but a lot of work there. Gives a lot of our direction for the next few months around voter education, redistricting, and Electoral College. Advocating for the fair treatment and success of women through the ERA, and supporting priorities to continue building a strong communication system, effective events such as this, and a sustainable organization. For those of you who are members and for those of you who are guests, we'd like to encourage you to become members. If you join now, you'll be a member through June of 2022. But what I'd like to say is this is your league. So if you have other ideas, things that you'd like to see us look at, become engaged in, and we would definitely welcome your participation in many of these activities. So continue to, we really appreciate everyone who jumped in and helped us during the general election. And so we'll look for your continued activity this year to help us achieve these priorities. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Kelly?
Yes.
It's Ruth. I would like to say to the members who are on this meeting that we did spend a good bit of money this year advertising our online voter information site, vote411.org. I hope you saw the roadside billboards. We had 3 in town. We had ads in all the local newspapers. We had things in the Mountain Express, ads in the Mountain Express. Thanks again to Nadine Hamby, member Nadine Hamby, who actually helped or was the major creator of those ads. And as a result, we had over 10,000 people use Vote 411, which is a huge increase over our use in the past. And I'm sure we will be building on that in the 2024 election. The board will be discussing whether or not we will be doing Vote 411. However, we have very few municipal elections happening in the election this year. So we don't pay for use of 411, but the state league does. So it's, we should be careful in how we spend the money. If it's just not even half a dozen people running for a municipal office or a seat on water, whatever those are called, the water board. So that was a big effort this year, along with the huge amount of work that Sue Casey and Carson did on signing people up to vote, informing people about where and when to vote. Our website carried so much information. And the other major thing that we did had to do with the census, the US Census, which this year, where are you? Lost you. The person who was in charge.
Oh, Vicky's here. We just don't see her.
Oh, yeah, I don't see her. I just see your name. Vicki Willard chaired that effort, led that effort, and we went everywhere, all over this county, to inform people about the need to participate in the census. And I actually worked for the census a little bit in late August and September. And I can tell you that in Buncombe County, I think we really did a good job of letting people know about their obligation and getting them to respond. So hopefully we'll have good, valid numbers for our county. And that's really all I want to say. Thanks to everyone who worked.
Yeah, that was a lot, Ruth. I mean, I think what Ruth just gave you a taste of was how much we did this past year. And so we could not have done it without all of you, with our member support and our volunteers. And so we're looking forward to another year of engagement. And we'll welcome, like I said, we'll welcome everyone who is not a member to join us. We still have a lot of work to do. So maybe not as much as vote 411 in the census last year, Ruth, but still a lot. That was a lot of work, and both were very successful.
And Pamela Holt in the chat says, thanks for including guests this evening. I look forward to becoming a member, and we look forward to having you. You can go to our website, LWVAB.org, and register to be a member, paying either online or through sending us a check. We'll take your money any way you wish to give it to us.
And your membership, yep.
And your membership. Well, thank you all. Kelly, back over to you.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. Does anybody have anything else? This is a member meeting, so if you have anything to come up or anything to add, let us know. I think that might be it, Ruth.
All right. Thank you.
Well, oh, I'm sorry. One more thing before you go. Thank you very much to Suzanne Fisher for arranging this and setting this up with Eileen Reavey. And thank you, Ruth, as membership chair, for pulling this all together.
Thanks, Suzanne.
I was
Bye,
just saying
everyone.
goodbye. I wasn't waiting for that. I was just saying goodbye.
Oh.
Oh, that was fascinating.